It happened in a courtroom that had already earned its place in American legal history. But on this day, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, sharper, as if everyone present understood they were about to witness a moment that would echo far beyond the walls of the building. When the judge's gavel came down, the room fell silent. Not the polite silence of routine procedure, but the kind of silence that follows a shock, the kind where even breathing feels loud. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. Then the words landed, and with them the weight of history. Donald Trump's request for bail was denied, not delayed, not postponed, not sent for further review. Denied. In American law, bail is more than paperwork. It is a symbol, a promise embedded deep in the justice system that a person is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Bail represents temporary freedom, a belief that the accused can be trusted to return to court and respect the process. When bail is denied, that belief fractures. And that is why this ruling was so explosive. This was not a procedural footnote. It was a public declaration from the bench that the court viewed this case as exceptionally serious and exceptionally dangerous. The denial signaled that the judge believed the risks of release outweighed tradition, precedent, and political pressure. Within minutes, the news hit the airwaves. Television networks cut into programming. Phones buzzed across Washington, New York, and beyond. Newsrooms scrambled. Headlines formed faster than context could catch up. A former president denied bail. That alone shattered assumptions Americans had carried for generations. Donald Trump has spent years turning the legal system into a battlefield. Delay after delay. Motion after motion. Appeal after appeal. He built a strategy around time, stretching cases, exhausting opponents, and shaping public narratives long before verdicts could arrive. This ruling disrupted that strategy completely. Bail denial removes a layer of insulation. It accelerates pressure. It shifts leverage. And it signals that the court is no longer willing to tolerate delay as a tactic. Supporters reacted instantly, calling the decision political persecution. Critics called it accountability. But for millions watching from the sidelines, one question rose above the noise. If a court is willing to deny bail to a former president, what happens next? Because this was no longer just another Trump legal story. This was a turning point, a moment when the rules appeared to change in real time, and the country felt it to understand why this ruling matters. You have to understand what bail truly represents in the American legal system. Bail is not about guilt. It is not about punishment. It is about risk. Judges evaluate whether a defendant is likely to flee, interfere with witnesses, intimidate participants, or commit further crimes while awaiting trial. Bail exists to balance freedom with safety, to protect the integrity of the process. In Trump's case, his legal team argued exactly what you would expect. They pointed to his public profile, his deep roots in the country, his constant visibility. They argued he was not a flight risk, that he had every reason to remain and fight, that denying bail to someone of his stature was unnecessary and extreme. But the judge wasn't evaluating Trump as a private citizen. The court looked at the full picture: Trump's influence, his ability to mobilize supporters instantly, his history of using public platforms to attack judges, witnesses, and prosecutors. This was not hypothetical. In previous cases, Trump's words had real-world consequences. Threats escalated. Witnesses reported harassment. Officials required increased security. The judge made clear that the concern was not about innocence or guilt, but about control. Control of the process. Control of the narrative. Control of public reaction. The court determined that Trump's freedom posed a meaningful risk to the case itself. And that is exactly what bail law is designed to prevent. When a judge denies bail, it sends a signal far beyond the defendant. It tells the public that the court believes the situation is volatile enough to justify extraordinary restraint. This was not routine. Bail denial for someone with Trump's status is exceedingly rare. And that rarity is precisely why the decision landed like an earthquake. Because for the first time, the legal system was publicly asserting authority over a man who built his power on being untouchable. Inside the courtroom, the tension was unmistakable. Journalists leaned forward. Court officers stiffened. Legal analysts exchanged glances. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shuffle of paper, every whispered note. As the judge explained the reasoning behind the decision, the message became unmistakably clear. This was not punishment. This was containment. The court stated that Trump represented a significant risk to both the integrity of the judicial process and public safety, not because of what he had done inside the courtroom, but because of what he could do outside of it. When the ruling ended, there was no dramatic outburst, no theatrical response, just gravity. Outside the courtroom, the reaction exploded. Media outlets immediately labeled it historic. Analysts emphasized how unprecedented the denial was. Headlines framed the moment as a turning point. Not just for Trump, but for the legal system itself. Trump's legal team moved quickly, signaling plans to appeal. They argued the judge was exaggerating the risk, ignoring Trump's past compliance, and injecting politics into law. But the court did not waver. The message was clear. Past status does not override present risk. And politically, the shockwaves spread fast. Republican allies rushed to defend Trump, using language of persecution and warning of judicial overreach. Others were noticeably quieter, cautious, calculating, aware of how dangerous this moment could become for the party. Democrats seized on the ruling as proof that accountability still exists. But even among them, concern lingered, because everyone understood the same truth. This decision did not calm tensions. It intensified them. Once the bail denial became official, Washington reacted with speed and division. On one side, Trump's supporters framed the ruling as a weaponized justice system. On social media, outrage spread instantly. Calls for protests circulated. Warnings of unrest followed. On the other side, critics called it long overdue accountability. They argued that power had shielded Trump for years, and that this moment marked the system finally pushing back. But beneath the noise, something deeper was happening. The bail denial fundamentally changed the legal battlefield. Trump's traditional strategy, delay, pressure, narrative dominance, suddenly lost effectiveness. Without bail, every move becomes constrained. Every statement carries consequences. Every filing is scrutinized. Legally, the case accelerated. Politically, the stakes skyrocketed. A former president facing detention or strict supervision is not just a legal image, it is a political earthquake. It reshapes campaigns, divides parties, and tests institutional stability. And that is why this ruling matters, far beyond Trump himself. It raises questions about power, about accountability, about whether American institutions can withstand pressure when the defendant is one of the most polarizing figures in modern history. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a far more dangerous chapter. Once the initial shock faded, Trump's legal team moved into crisis mode. For years, their strategy had relied on one central assumption. Time was their ally. Delay proceedings, challenge jurisdiction, flood the court with motions, push cases into appeals before consequences could land. That strategy now faced a wall. With bail denied, the pace of the case changed dramatically. Judges gain leverage when defendants are no longer free to maneuver indefinitely. The court, not the defendant, controls the clock. Trump's attorneys signaled their next move almost immediately. Appeal. They argued the denial was excessive. They claimed the judge overestimated the risk and ignored Trump's history of compliance. They warned that this ruling could set a dangerous precedent, opening the door for courts to detain political figures based on influence rather than action. But legal experts were quick to point out a hard truth. Appellate courts move slowly. Emergency appeals exist, but they are rarely successful unless a clear abuse of discretion can be shown. And in bail decisions, judges are given wide authority, especially in high-risk, high-impact cases. That meant Trump's team faced a race against time. While they prepared filings, the case itself continued to move forward. Discovery deadlines loomed. Hearings approached. The legal pressure that Trump had avoided for years was now unavoidable. Behind the scenes, advisors debated a shift in tone. Attacking the court too aggressively could backfire. Escalating rhetoric might reinforce the very concerns that led to bail denial in the first place. So the strategy began to pivot, from confrontation to optics, house arrest, electronic monitoring, strict communication limits. These were no longer signs of weakness, they were bargaining chips. The message was clear. If Trump could not secure full release, his team would fight for controlled release, anything to regain some strategic ground. But the judge's earlier language cast a long shadow. The court had already made its position known. This was not about symbolism. It was about control. And for the first time, Trump was not holding it. As the legal battle intensified, the political consequences began to surface with alarming speed. On Capitol Hill, reactions split sharply along familiar lines, but with new cracks emerging beneath the surface. Trump's closest allies rushed to defend him, echoing his language of persecution and judicial overreach. They warned that denying bail to a former president threatened democracy itself. Some hinted darkly at unrest if the courts continued down this path, but quieter voices told a different story. Privately, many Republican lawmakers expressed concern, not just about the ruling, but about what comes next. A prolonged legal crisis, tied directly to the party's most dominant figure, posed a serious risk. If Trump remained under legal restriction or detention, campaigning would be disrupted, messaging would be constrained, and the party would be forced to defend legal actions instead of policy positions. For some Republicans, this was no longer about loyalty, it was about survival. Democrats, meanwhile, framed the moment as validation, proof that accountability still applies, even at the highest levels of power. But even within Democratic circles, caution lingered. They understood the volatility of the moment. A legal decision can be justified and still destabilizing. Public trust in institutions is fragile. Political polarization is already extreme, and any perception that the courts are becoming political actors carries serious risk. This is where the bail denial crossed a dangerous line, not legally, but socially, because once politics and justice become indistinguishable in the public mind, legitimacy erodes. And both parties knew it. The moment the bail denial hit headlines, the media ecosystem ignited. Cable news ran wall-to-wall coverage. Panels debated precedent, risk, and political consequence. Every sentence of the judge's reasoning was dissected, repeated, reframed. But the real acceleration happened online. Social media platforms turned the ruling into a battlefield. Supporters flooded feeds with claims of injustice. Critics countered with arguments about accountability. Clips spread faster than facts. Narratives hardened within hours. This speed mattered. In the modern media environment, perception often forms before understanding, and once perception sets in, reversing it becomes nearly impossible. Security agencies quietly monitored the reaction. History had shown that Trump's legal setbacks could trigger real-world consequences. Protests, threats, escalation. The court had not ignored this reality. It had anticipated it. This was one of the unspoken factors behind the bail denial. Influence is not neutral. Mobilization carries risk, and unchecked rhetoric can turn volatile fast. As days passed, the question shifted. Not was the ruling legal, but can the country absorb it? Because this was no longer just about Trump. It was about whether American institutions could enforce accountability without tearing themselves apart. Now, the country stands at a crossroads. Trump's legal team will fight. Appeals will be filed. Motions will stack up. The battle will be loud, aggressive, and relentless. But the court has already drawn a line. Delay will not erase risk. Power will not override process. Status will not guarantee freedom. For Trump, the denial of bail reshapes everything. Legally, politically, personally. His influence remains massive, but it is no longer unchecked. For the Republican Party, this is a moment of reckoning, a test of identity, a question of whether loyalty to one figure outweighs the future of the institution. For Democrats, it is a moment of responsibility. Victory laps would be reckless. Stability matters as much as accountability. And for the country, this is a moment of truth. Can the legal system confront power without becoming political? Can democracy enforce rules without collapsing under pressure? Can justice survive when the defendant is a former president? This bail denial is not the end of the Trump story. It is the beginning of its most dangerous chapter. Because once the courts move forward without fear, the stakes change. And when the stakes change, history follows. What happens next will define not just Trump's future, but the future of American democracy itself.